Hello, hello. Been a minute what with Thanksgiving weekend and all that. But time to get back in the saddle. Uh, Today we're going to be discussing Iowa's 25-point win over North Florida. Um, Before that, and before we get into the game, I did just want to take a quick minute to just like mention what Tony Perkins was going through. Um, didn't know, I didn't see the TV broadcast. I didn't know at the time what was going on. Um, but you could tell something was off even pregame because normally he's full of enthusiasm and it it was like more downplayed, more than you expect. He always does his routine where he always makes threes from all around the world from the perimeter, and then he does some freestyle dunk. He's always the last person to leave the floor, um, and even during that, it's like, he pulled off some cool dunks, but it's like, it's like, oh, what's up with that? And during the pregame hype video when they were introducing starters, his hands was in the towels. Um, and you didn't know the context at the time, but obviously it makes sense now. There was a lot more important things on his mind than basketball. Really, really just tough. I don't, I don't know if I would have been able to be in that situation, um, and keep my cool and be able to stay as focused as he was, because he really was, from just a pure basketball standpoint, like excellent tonight. Like maybe his best game in the entire season. Um, but that's tough, man. That's really tough. And you see the hug line he had coming off the floor at the end of the game, where just all the coaches, all the players, just gave him long hugs, and you can tell it's like, man, that's just tough. Um, in particular, to lose a family member just after you see him over the Thanksgiving weekend, um, or maybe he didn't get the opportunity to go back home during that time, which makes things maybe even a little bit more sad, honestly. Um, but yeah, that's just tough. And I think you have to show respect to that, to be able to like just keep it together and still play to the best that you can. Um, it's just I feel bad for the dude. Um, but just from a just guess focusing on the game he had just today, it's like just an excellent game from Tony. Um, his mid range game was really working today. Multiple floaters, multiple just some tough fadeaways from mid range. Getting his teammates involved. On top of that, like really intense from a defensive standpoint. If you're just watching him off the ball defensively, there's numerous actions where North Florida is trying to run something off the ball, and he stayed so attached to his player that he just kind of blew up that initial action North Florida wanted to run. Um, you can tell like his focus level. This was an important game to him, not because it's North Florida, but because of the surrounding circumstances. Um, and I just I thought I would give a shout out. Like that was a hell of a performance in the circumstances, and something I know that he and his family can be proud of. Not that they wouldn't be proud of who he is anyway as a person, because there's bigger things in basketball, and there's a lot to be proud of when it comes to Tony Perkins on and off the floor. Um, so I thought I would give a quick shout out to that. Um, but I didn't. But trying to transition away from that, um, I didn't do any videos on any of the holiday tournaments that Iowa participated in last weekend, just because I didn't really want to. I just would rather just like stay and just talk and socialize with friends and family. Um, and there are just a lot of games going on at once, and having to cover all those games all at once was, I don't know if I would have enjoyed that. I'll probably be in a similar situation later in the season when both the men's and women's teams are in the NCAA tournament, and I'll cover all those games in the Big Ten tournament. I'll cover all those games, but I kind of wanted a little bit of a break. But I didn't get the chance to talk about the Hawks and their San Diego Holiday Tournament, the Rady's Children's Invitational, I think it was called. So I thought I would just give a quick kind of like recap of some of the bigger points that I kind of wanted to get in from those games. I think I'm going to start with offense probably. Excuse me. From an offense standpoint, kind of a tale of two games. A much better performance in Seton Hall in Oklahoma. Just kind of like thinking about those two teams who played Oklahoma and Seton Hall, both defensive oriented. Both teams that win with defense. So they're going to make things difficult for you at times there. What I will say, like, a lot was probably made about the shooting performance for Iowa against Oklahoma. And I won't say, like, it was obviously an important shooting performance and we missed a lot of open shots. But at the same time, that's kind of basketball. Sometimes the shot just isn't going to be falling. So I try not to go too crazy about that kind of stuff just because it's variable from game to game. And you see in the two games since both Seton Hall and this North Florida game, the shooting's been much better. So, like, you can't really take too much away from just one bad night shooting. What I will say, though, is the amount of just off passes or just, like, mishandling passes or bad passes in general against Oklahoma, it was really staggering as an Iowa fan. And it's just not something you come to expect from Iowa. I was looking earlier today, and when you go back to just the national assisted turnover ranks for Iowa, Iowa's been in the top 10 in assist turnover ratio in every single year since the 2018-2019 year. That's the last time Iowa was outside the top 10 assist turnover ratio on the year. And we were 47th that year. So that's, even then, that still was a good ranking. So it's like, you can make an argument that Iowa's passing is the biggest positive trademark of the Fram Caff era, is how well Iowa takes care of the ball, how many assists Iowa generally gets per game. And it was just staggering just to see, like, just how off everything was for Iowa. I mean, currently right now, Iowa's 5th nationally in turnover percentage. And if you had the only game you had seen from Iowa was that Oklahoma game, you would not believe that 100%. You would call BS on that. Because, like, you had, like, a situation where Tony was throwing a pass to Peyton, who wasn't looking, and it led to a run out. There was one situation where, like, Peyton received a back screen. He was wide open for a layup, just on a back cut. And the pass hit his hands, and he just dropped it out of bounds, and he would have had a layup otherwise. But there was one situation where Tony threw one pass, and he was thinking Pat was going to go one way, and Pat went the other way. And those are just a couple examples. There were just so many examples. Just watching through the Oklahoma games, like, the hell's going on? So, like, when you have that poor of a passing game, and when you have that poor of a shooting game, to be honest with you, that's just, like, my first instinct is just to call that one of those games that just is what it is and you just move on. Because Oklahoma is good defensively, but honestly, some of those turnovers that Iowa had was like, no, that's just Iowa not being up to their standard. So I wouldn't go too crazy about that. The Seton Hall was much better from a passing perspective, and we had 11 turnovers in that game, but Seton Hall is a team who forces turnovers generally. They press, they try to get up your face. So 11 turnovers I don't think was that big a deal, and I don't think there weren't as many turnovers where it's like, what the F is going on here in that game? So again, I just think that was just a one-game thing against Oklahoma that I don't really want to overreact to. If we played a little bit better, we still probably would have lost because Oklahoma is a good team. I was wrong about that one, calling them maybe a little bit of fool's gold, but hey, it's not the first time I'm wrong. It won't be the last time I'm wrong. It's not that big a deal. It's just basketball. But yeah, but defensively though, probably more concerns there, and that's generally the case for this Iowa basketball program. I won't go into everything defensively because I want to keep this kind of brief and focus on this North Florida game to an extent. What I will say is just an offhand thing. It's like it just feels like Iowa's in a real bad position defensively at the 3 and 4 spots this year. And that's not to say that Iowa's defensive potential, whatever you want to call it, is amazing at the 1, 2, and 5 spots. Like, there are issues there defensively. It's not always the best defending, but like, you can see the potential there to at least be like, okay, like there's at least some things there defensively like. Which is not to say, I guess, that there's nothing to like defensive at 3 and 4, but there just seems like there's a whole lot more problems with those positions than the other ones. And the biggest issue is I don't really know if there's even really a fix to those issues. So when I talk about the small forward, the power forward positions, the players who play the 3 and the 4 for Iowa, I'm really talking about 4 players total, the 4 players who kind of rotate those spots. You can change things up maybe a little bit who plays those spots for Iowa, but I'm talking about the main 4 players who are going to play there for Iowa. Sanford, both Sanfords, I guess, Pat McCaff and Laji Dembele. I just don't know if there's really a solution defensively from any of those 4 guys at that spot. And again, with some of these freshmen, like, people get excited because it's always the potential. It's always the unknown. It's like, oh God, what can this guy do? What can he bring to the table? Oh God, he's this, oh he's that. And people always like to hype up freshmen just in general. Every fan base does it, not just Iowa. But even someone like Lodge, it's like, it's not really even the mental aspect of the game, because the mental aspect of the game I don't necessarily expect to be there from freshmen from day one. I think that's natural. I think you have to allow some progression from mental standpoint defensively throughout the course of their career, throughout the course of their first year. You have to allow them the ability to get better and get adjusted to the fact that they're playing at a completely different level of basketball. So like, you can find some examples where Laji just like has some maybe like mental errors that most freshmen do. I mean, you see this mental mistakes from Brock and Owen too, etc. But the main thing about Laji is like, I just through these first 7 games that I always play, I just don't really think he moves well laterally. And I think he's also still kind of getting used to using his body. If again, he played in the 2021 FIBA U19 World Cup or FIBA U20 World Cup. I think it's the FIBA U19 World Cup in 2021. He played there for Mali. In that tournament, he was listed at 6'3". He took most of his shots from the perimeter. He really feels like a guard shooter who had a big growth spurt and is now still trying to get used to playing physically. He still has some just like learning to do about how really to play as physical as he probably could. Not that he doesn't play super physical, because you can find times where he plays physical, but there's some times you're like, you can still tell this is somebody who's still kind of learning how to play inside necessarily. But the big thing is like, from these first 7 games, I just don't think he really moves well laterally. Although I do think he's made, honestly, a little bit of progress in these last 2 games specifically defensively, which is great to see. But he still has work to do. But even not just like factoring in like the freshmen, because Price, again, he's athletic limited. Although, to be honest with you, if I'm gonna power rank Iowa's players defensively at the 3-4 positions, honestly, Price is probably second behind Peyton, which is not really a good thing. Because Price is generally in the right spot, but he's just athletically limited. He still has a lot of growing to do into his body, getting stronger, getting faster, just going through strength and conditioning, as you'd expect from a freshman. But the upperclassmen, Pat McCaffrey's inconsistent defensively, not really super mobile laterally, and he can get deflections just because he's 6'9", has long arms. But he has mental lapses. If you watch him just guard off the ball, you can find instances where he'll just like kind of fall asleep. There was the buzzer beater that Seton Hall hit at the end of the first half. Iowa was trapping the side ball screen up top, and Pat just didn't rotate up top hard enough to the shooter at the top of the key, and he was able to hit a 3 because of it. And he just has mental lapses like that. And while Peyton is again, probably Iowa's best perimeter defender. If you really go back and watch those 2 games in San Diego, they were attacking him. And if you look at the box scores for Oklahoma and Seton Hall, I mean, Seton Hall's best player was Dre Davis, a 3-4 hybrid forward who's athletic, capable of taking off the bounce. For Oklahoma, Jalen Moore, Otega Owe, both effective players. Both effective players at that 3-4 spot, both athletic forwards who just drive the ball. I think Iowa's really going to struggle to guard athletes in that 6'6" to 6'8" range or whatever at the 3-4 spot. I think that's going to be a real struggle for Iowa all year long. And honestly, I just don't know if there's really the athletes in Iowa's roster to really guard those kind of players. So I just don't think there's an athlete. And you might see a situation where Iowa can maybe put Josh Sticks at the 3 position, but even then, Josh doesn't really have the height or length to probably contest a guy in the 6'7" to 6'8", 6'9" range who's really athletic. So that's probably what Iowa might do against more guard-oriented teams, to put Josh at the 3. But I just don't know if that's even going to work either. So I think against teams that have those athletic forwards who can attack the basket, I think it's going to be a struggle for Iowa to stop those kind of teams at times. And again, you can find defensive. I think Tony Perkins has separated himself as the best perimeter defender on this team. I don't think you can nitpick his game too much. You can find maybe certain examples where he gets beat. He got beat a couple times in the beginning of the second half of the Seton Hall game, but at the same time, he held Richmond to 4-14 to 4-15 from what I remember, and he made things difficult for him most of the night. And even against Trey Alexander of Creighton, Tony did the best of any of our guards guarding him. He was the only guy who could maybe consistently get stops, maybe sometimes. So he's separating himself as the best defender, and he's not perfect, but he's still clearly Iowa's best perimeter defender. Even guys like Josh or Asante, again, maybe not the best defenders. You can probably nitpick a couple things, but even then, it's no, mostly positive from what I'm seeing. And there's some you can find defensive questions of all of Iowa's positions, because Iowa isn't the best defensive team, but Iowa's defense at the 3-4 position feels shaky. It feels very shaky. But I think it goes without saying the one player who's really, really, really stood out defensively so far through these first 7 games is Owen Freeman. So I kind of want to start this off with a couple stats, just because before I get into some of the other stuff, because I think there's a couple things to note here statistically. So amongst all Big Ten players, and I went to barttorvik.com for this information, for this specific stat. So on barttorvik.com, you can search player stats and you can set up filters to get whatever you want. So amongst all Big Ten players who've played at least 25% of their team's potential minutes, i.e. 10 minutes a game, he's the leader in the entire Big Ten in block percentage. 14.2, I think it was. Oh, crap. Yeah, it was 14 something. I must have closed that page. But leads the entire Big Ten in terms of blocking percentage. Potentially the best shot blocker in the entire conference, just through which is crazy. I don't think anyone would have guessed that through the first month of the year. And I don't think that's probably going to hold up, but if it does, holy moly. But at the same time, it's sometimes with blocks and stats, they can be a little overrated, because so I think you need some maybe more context. Because when you think about, okay, you're going for a lot of block shots. And that's great, and every team needs a shot blocking presence. But I think one thing you kind of want to know, also looking at his advanced stats, is looking at what Owen's doing from rebound perspective. Now, he's rebounding a lot better offensively than he is defensively. If you look at the percentages in the analytics, most of his rebounds are coming on the offensive end. They're not coming on the defensive end. Why is that? Well, when you're going for shot blocks, you're not in a position to box out because you're in the air. And because you're in the air, you're also not going to be able to adjust if the ball isn't going immediately to you. So say he's trying to block a shot on the left side of the rim, and the layup just goes over his hands and it goes to the other side of the basket. He's not going to be in position to get that rebound because he's in the air, and he's going to have to like land and then readjust and go get the ball. And that's hard to ask. And a lot of shot blockers, that's why you see a lot of putbacks. When like a center goes for a block shot, if he's not able to block the shot, often the guy who that center was guarding is able to get the putback, just because no one's boxing him out. So that's an issue that can come from trying to be overly zealous, I guess, in terms of blocking shots. So I don't think, and with steals, like, okay, sometimes gambling for steals isn't always a good thing defensively, because it can lead to wide open layups, etc. It can maybe lead to a back cut if you're gambling too much and trying to deny too many passing lanes, or going too far in denying passing lanes, I guess I would say. So blocks and steals are important. They're stats that can guide you defensively. But like what I really want to show to highlight what Owen is capable of defensively. And now these stats I got from hoopexplorer.com, hoop-explorer.com. And that's a site where like you can look at on-off stats. And what does that mean? Like, okay, like how does a player impact the game when he's on the floor versus off the floor? How many points does, say, Iowa score when Tony Perkins is on the floor, and how many points does Iowa score when Tony Perkins is off the floor? What's the difference? How important is a guy like maybe Tony Perkins to offense? And you can also apply that to defense for any of Iowa's players. So if you go to hoopexplorer.com, at the top there's a tab that says on-off, and then it sends you to a screen where you're able to type in like any individual Iowa player and just see like, okay, like how are they impacting the game defensively, offensively? And when you're looking at that, like it just further illustrates how absolutely important Owen is to our defense. And what I did for this is I only selected Iowa's games versus top 100 opponents because I only wanted to look at those 3 games against Creighton, Oklahoma, and Seton Hall that Iowa played, because I wanted to see like, okay, like how is Iowa doing, not against by opponents, but against actual competition that has a realistic chance to beat us. And like he's far and away the biggest difference maker defensively. And so in those 3 games, which again is against actual competition who's capable of beating us, he's the only player which, when Owen is on the floor, Iowa gives up less than a point of possession, which is the goal, I think, for most teams when you're playing a solid opponent. Like if you're playing a high major opponent and you hold them to less than a point of possession, that's really, really good. That's what you want. And the really good teams hold teams like 0.8, 0.9 points per possession. And the crazy thing is, when Owen's on the floor, Iowa's giving up 0.91 points per possession. That means, again, against 3 pretty solid teams, Iowa was borderline on really good defensively when Owen Freeman was in the game. And when Owen was off the floor in those 3 games, Iowa was giving up 1.26 points per possession. That's nearly a 0.35 difference, which is a huge difference. I mean, pretty much everyone else on Iowa's roster is not that dissimilar from an on-off perspective. I will say these stats can be a little bit unreliable because if you look at them, you see that all of Iowa's bench players have a positive impact defensively if you go on-off numbers. But what I would say is, like, I think that's mostly in product of playing with Owen, because even though those guys do have maybe a slight positive impact in terms of what they do, in terms of on-off defensively, Owen is still so clearly far ahead of everyone else. And even the eye test just tells you, like, he's really the most important player into that unit defensively, and he's the one who really elevates them. And the other guys, I think, mostly benefit from an analytics perspective because they're in the same lineup generally as him. And again, like, another thing to keep in mind is a lot of this is lineup driven. So you do have to kind of take it with a certain grain of salt. I wouldn't necessarily, like, 3 games isn't necessarily the biggest sample size to go off of. Because just for example, if you go based on-off numbers, Desante Bowen is the worst offender on Iowa's team, which I just don't agree with. He's either second or third in terms of our perimeter defenders, whether you like him or Josh Dixmore. I think you can argue either one there. But they're both in that kind of same boat. But why do I think someone like DeSante, for example, would be so low and on-off defensively? I think that's mostly a product of the fact that he's not really ever on the floor with Owen, because Iowa generally likes to play Brock and Owen together defensively, or just in that second unit, because they have such great chemistry from high school and AAU. So I think even though DeSante doesn't grade out poorly in the on-off numbers, I think that's mostly a product of lineups, which again is like why you have to kind of take some of this data with a grain of salt. But that being said, you also have to, this is where you use the eye test of like, okay, do I think those stats for Owen are valid? And he has a lot, he's not perfect defensively. You can find issues throughout the course of these first 7 games, but you can still tell, oh man, he is a huge difference maker for Iowa defensively. Again, right now from a statistical standpoint, he's the best shot blocker in the entire Big Ten, which is absolutely insane. But I also want to shout out, and in these last 2 games against Seton Hall and North Florida, only 2 combined personal fouls. That was a really big issue for me. They made note of in a couple of my videos where it's like, okay, he's not sometimes taking too many gambles out there on defense, and sometimes a little bit too reckless on offense. But I think it's been improving these last 2 games, and particularly in this game, this is a defense thing, but posting up guys and not lowering your shoulder and not barging through them, being more patient, understanding, like, hey, I have a huge size advantage. I don't need to rush things. That was something I noticed a couple times. He was maybe pushing the issue a little bit too much in some of the earlier games, playing a little bit too much physicality. But you can already see the progression in this North Florida game where it's like, all right, calm down. I have the size advantage. Let's take it easy and score. He's not rushing. And that's great to see. That is great to see that kind of progress already just through the first month of the year. And he did have 1 foul in this North Florida game where he was defending the post and he unnecessarily reached around for a steal and he's just not in position for it. It's like, no, you don't need to really reach for a steal in the situation because no one on North Florida is capable of scoring on you in the post. So it's not like he still has completely abandoned some of his fouling tendencies, but it's gotten a lot better. And you can see his activity level is just amazing, even on the perimeter. I counted, and this wasn't including his block that he had on a 3-point shot, but I counted 4 separate times where he was able to alter a 3-point shot from North Florida. And one of those times he altered it so the guy shot long and to the left, so the guy was able to bank it in, which is fluky. But you can tell, like, oh yeah, he forced an air ball one time, or not really an air ball. I think it just didn't hit the rim. It went off the backboard long. But like you can tell, like he has like the same tendency that someone like Jared Uthoff had a couple years ago for Iowa, where he's capable of really affecting shots from the perimeter. And you really saw in this North Florida game, again, 4 times where he altered shots, where he didn't necessarily get a block, but you can tell, like, oh no, North Florida is uncomfortable shooting over him. And the 1 block he had is a really incredible play because if you actually look at it, he's not in a position at all. Like, North Florida is kind of pushing the ball, playing with some pace, and the rest of Iowa players have found their defensive assignment. And he's trying to get back in transition. He's running to the front of the rim, and he's not necessarily picking anyone up. And he sees his guy, and he goes over and blasts a shot. But it's like, he's also like, you can make an argument like, okay, he's not really in great position. He's late to see the play, but that's where you see the natural talent take off. And he's still able to make a play, even though he's maybe not in the best position initially. And that's just like, that's exciting because you see that natural ability, and it's like, man, there's a lot of potential to work with here. And as he continues to iron out the mental side of the game, which is just natural for any freshman, Iowa, it actually gives Iowa some serious defensive potential for the first time in a while. Again, you think back to the best period in this Fran McCaffery era defensively, it's when you had a defensive center in Adam Woodbury, who wasn't necessarily a shot blocker or anything, but he understood the game positionally, defensively, and he was a good communicator. And he was in the right spot. He didn't have mental lapses. Having that foundation defensively at center is a huge impact in college basketball. You can make an argument for either the point guard or center position being the most impactful position defensively, and I think some people would say point guard just because you want defense up for the ability to shut down some of the electric guards in college basketball. Some people say that, okay, centers, they're able to cover other people's mistakes with shot blocking, etc. So whichever one you think is more important, it's whatever, that's your personal opinion. But still, just having that kind of impact potentially at center is just wowzer. But again, and this is another thing I kind of want to mention too. So when you think about, okay, his shot blocking tendency, and I said earlier, okay, that opens the door for offensive rebounding percentage chances for the opposing team, because Owen's often not going to be in position maybe for the rebounding, because he's going for blocking shots, which I think is something Iowa really needs. So I want Owen to go for blocks. I want him to try and impact the game there. But we still need to cover for him there. And this is something I didn't necessarily anticipate thinking coming into the year, but because I don't really think Iowa has any athletes at the 3 or 4 positions anyway, to be honest with you, I kind of at the point where I just kind of want to play Ben Krikke at the power forward position. I don't think he has the ability to affect the game defensively at the 5 just because I don't think he's enough of a shot blocker. At the 4 position, okay, that's going to be less of his responsibility. He can focus more on rebounding. I don't think he moves as poorly on the perimeter as people would probably initially think. It's funny, if you look at the on-off stats for Iowa defensively from Hoop Explorer from those 3 games against the teams against Creighton, Oklahoma, Seton Hall, Ben Krikke actually rates as the best defender of any of Iowa starters. He's the only starter who has a positive rating there. I think there are probably people who I don't go online to read the discourse that much. There are probably people who are calling him a terrible defender or whatever. And to be honest with you, I'm not going to say he's the best defender because I think he's very limited athletically, or not really only limited athletically. I think people are probably overstating how bad he is defensively, though. He's in the right spots generally. And while at the 4 position, I think he would get abused athletically, probably at times, I don't think it'd be any more so than any other Iowa players at that position. And if that's the case, considering how important he is from an offensive standpoint, I'm kind of just at the point where I kind of just want to see him and Owen start together at 4 and 5, or at least play the lion's share of minutes at those positions. Because Owen is just so important defensively, and if Iowa's going to struggle as much as I think they probably are going to at that 4 and 3 positions defensively, I kind of just want to have better rebounding in those spots, so that when Owen goes for block shots, we have rebounding support to help support him. And I think that comes in. I think naturally, if you put Ben at that position, along with Peyton Sanford, who's leading Iowa in rebounding, that gives you guys who can help cover for him from a rebounding perspective. And I think that's probably going to turn out to be Iowa's best defensive lineup, is involving those 3 of the 3, 4, 5 spots. And maybe occasionally you can put a more athletic guy in the 3 spot for Peyton, or Peyton can maybe cover rebounding at times for Owen. And Lodge, as he continues to improve, can also play a role in helping us rebounding-wise. But I'm kind of at the point where, honestly, I'm just kind of want to start Ben Krikke, because I just think it's too important to get Owen out there from a defensive standpoint. And I think you need some cover for him from a rebounding perspective, because you have to get rebounds. It's the most important part of defense. Really, it's kind of crazy. I don't know if you can gamble on Big Ten Freshman of the Year odds. I wouldn't necessarily place some money on necessarily on Owen anyway, because I don't know how many minutes he's going to play in order to win Freshman of the Year. But there's an argument that really he could potentially be the best freshman just overall in this entire Big Ten. And if you look at, and a lot of people talked about going into this year that this current freshman class, the 2023 freshman class, was a down year talent-wise, just nationwide. That's a theme that if you read national talking points, a lot of people talk about how it's a down year for talent, and I think you mostly see it in the Big Ten too. Owen is a serious contender for freshman of the year, regardless of whether he starts or not. Oh, but if he does start, I think I would feel very confident in him being first, second, or third in that race. I'll say that. But he's going to be a player for Iowa, that's for sure. If he keeps up this shot blocking impact, it'd be interesting to see. I don't think the NBA is going to come calling after this year. I don't even think they're going to be particularly looking to take Owen after a second or third year. He's probably going to be an all 4 years kind of guy. But if he keeps affecting shots at this rate, I mean, you have to start thinking if you're the NBA. But I don't necessarily anticipate it continuing at this pace because honestly, it's an insane pace. But it's just kind of something to keep an eye on. Like, I wouldn't recommend the NBA scouts to don't take him first overall or whatever. But I would say to them, keep an eye out just a little bit. Not that he's an NBA prospect right now, but just keep an eye on that potentially. It might be a few years down the road, but I would keep an eye on that. So, kind of moving on to another player, Peyton Sandford. Really amped up in this game. You can tell he was feeling it. Diving for loose balls. It's kind of funny. He immediately dives for a loose ball, and you can tell he's fired up trying to crowd. And he's like, and you can tell immediately after that, he's like, "Oh, I'm not passing again for the rest of the game." He just took 2 heat checks after that. And he made one of them in fairness. It was a fadeaway contested, which is like, oh my lord, what a shot. But then he took another one, transition, and then he kind of turned the ball over, and Fran's like, all right, you're a little too wound up. Calm down, Peyton. So he rolled with Pat McCaffrey to end the game, which was fine. Pat had a decent game. But you could tell Peyton was really amped up just from the way he was responding in that second half, which is great to see. I would rather have a player be super amped up and super passionate, and you have to pull him back rather than having to motivate anybody to play hard or anything. But again, with Peyton, it's like you really, again, you see a shot-making variety in this game. Comes down to pin down, sees his player, goes under the screen, flares out, receives the ball, 1-2 dribble pull-up from mid-range. Again, he can hit from all 3 levels, drives to his left, hits a left-handed floater, coming off a ball screen, fadeaway contested 3. It's like the shot-making variety that Peyton can just like show is just incredible. From just a purely from his versatility in shot making, he might be the most versatile shot maker of the Fran era. If I were to probably think about some of the better ones, I think Jared Uthoff has to be in that conversation too, because Jared could hit some insane fadeaways from mid-range area. He could hit from deep in 3-point range, could attack the rim, etc. Someone like Peter Jock was really good at hitting contested mid-range and 3-point shots. Jordan Bohannon is obviously a great shooter, and he could hit step backs, etc. But Peyton's in that category for maybe just one of the more versatile shooters of the Fran era. And it's kind of a nice thing about doing these videos a day after the game is you get some time to think about it, but also you get to see some things. And it's kind of interesting. Jonathan Givony of ESPN put out some draft projections, and he actually had Peyton at 47th overall for this current upcoming 2024 NBA draft. I don't think that's probably going to surprise people. I don't honestly know if I'm that surprised by it. I remember before his sophomore year last year, Sam Vecenie of The Athletic put out an article highlighting Peyton Sandford as one of the 5 breakout players in all of college basketball. And he did have a good year. He won 6th Man of the Year last year. But if Sam Vecenie is writing about you, that means he's hearing NBA scouts talk about you, pretty much. So it's honestly not that surprising that Peyton's being put at the back end of the second round. I think 47, I don't know if he can raise much higher than that. And again, this is a down freshman class, this 2023 freshman class that's going to be draft eligible for the 2024 NBA draft. It's a down class, so I think in a normal year, Peyton would probably be more of a guy in the 50 to 70 range for a draft prospect. Somebody who's a specialist than an NBA team would maybe draft just because they feel like they have a need for shooting. I think that's generally the range he probably falls in. I don't think he's going to be able to raise much higher than 47 just because I think there's still just limitations from an athletic standpoint defensively. He's in the right positions generally, but it's a different game from an athletic standpoint in the pros. But I don't honestly think it's that surprising if he's projected to be taken in the back half of the second round. Because honestly, I just think he's a very versatile shot maker. Like even someone like a Joe Wieskamp who got picked at like 41 or 42, I don't remember what, by the Spurs. Joe was always a catch and shoot guy or a guy who went all the way to the rim for a tough finish. He wasn't really somebody who like necessarily hit like the kind of contested mid-range shots that Peyton has shown the ability to hit, the kind of contested floaters that Peyton has shown the ability to hit. Peyton has a more versatile shot-making profile, which I think probably is intriguing to NBA teams, even though Joe was objectively much more athletic and he was capable of getting up there vertically, and he tested well at the NBA draft combine there. But I just kind of want to note that as Peyton's, I think people would probably be surprised by that. And I'm not saying like he's a great NBA draft prospect or anything. Like again, 47 is really the highest I think you could justify taking him in that general area. But I think he is somebody who's going to be on their radar as a back half of second round guy. And considering that, I think it necessarily is a question whether he's come back to school. But at the same time, like I think there's a good argument he wants to enjoy playing another year with his brother. Getting NIL at Iowa for another year is also something to look at. You can make money and play in college now, so I wouldn't worry too much about him leaving early or anything. I don't know if he has first round potential. I like him as a player. I just don't know if I like him that much. So I kind of want to touch a little bit on both Josh Dixon and Sante Bowen. Players who had their positive moments in this game. Some struggles for DeSante at the end of the first half, but other than that, he had a really good game. Pushing the ball, finding guys in transition. There was one really good time where he did, well, a couple good times, honestly, where he saw the numbers advantage when he was pushing transition off a made shot. There was one time we had a 2v1 on the weak side, and he saw that, and it's like he looked off the one defender and was able to find Pat McCaffrey for an open three. Another time he saw like, oh, hey, they're not stopping the ball off a made shot. I'm just going to keep going. So he showed good recognition there. And one thing I also want to highlight for DeSante, and this is a really big positive to me, 13 for 18 on shots around the rim so far this year, 72%. That's a really, really good percentage for a guard around the rim. And it makes sense. It's now his second year in this program. He's had the ability to get stronger. 6'3" at point guard is long and athletic, but capable of finishing through contact. And he's shooting well from the free throw line. A really positive sign there. Now he's struggling in his mid-range game. He's only 1 for 10 from mid-range so far in the year. But like it's really nice to see him able to attack and finish around the rim, because we don't necessarily need everyone to be a three-point shooter in order to have success, but we do need everyone to have something offensively they can provide. And you can find plenty of moments throughout the course of this year where he's providing that ability to attack the rim, draw fouls, create for himself and others. And he's doing it all while being not turnover prone at all. Only turnover percentage at 8.5. Anything below 10 is elite. So he's had a really strong year. And defensively, he gets after it. He applies ball pressure. His length is able to bother guys. I think it's been I think this is probably, it's not as strong. It's not like, oh my God, like he's the greatest thing ever. It's not like super above your expectations. I think he's mostly exceeding expectations, but not like, oh Lord, like the greatest thing ever. But he is doing really well. And there was like he got yelled at a little bit by Fran. Fran was weirdly angry at a lot of players. Or not really a lot of players. He was just angry in general. This was the most animated he's been in all the games I've seen so far at home this year, which is really weird. Because he wasn't really that angry during the Arkansas State game, even though that was another game that was really close too at times. But Fran got after Pat McCaffrey a couple times, which is interesting. He got after Asante at the end of the first half just for taking that early mid-range shot. And he was also talking post-game how he wanted Iowa to use up more clock, roll the ball when they were inbounding, so we could potentially get the last shot, which is on Asante, I guess, to a certain extent, but it's also Price Sanford was the inbounder there. He probably needed that's a freshman not recognizing, hey, how to use the shot clock, how to make sure you get the last shot in a half. And then there was like a poor job boxing out by Josh Dix on the offensive rebound opportunity for North Florida that they converted to end the half. So a little bit of consternation there, but and now you talk about Josh, I guess, really coming into his own offensively. And this is something I talked about in a couple. I forget which video I talked about it in, but he's got a really well-rounded offensive game. Capable of hitting threes, capable of hitting shots from mid-range, capable of finishing strong around the rim. He's more athletic than people realize. He makes good decisions. He's a good passer. Again, it's like he sort of has first or second offensive scoring option potential just because, again, how versatile his offense game can be. And maybe he doesn't necessarily have the athletic tools to maybe pull that off, but like the skill level is there. Again, he's going to be really interesting to see develop throughout the next couple years. And it's nice to see him get going because he really does have a well-rounded offensive game, and I think he's an underrated defender too. He did a good job with navigating screens in this game. Probably one of Iowa's better players at like avoiding getting screened. You saw the one block he had. Again, an underrated athlete. He's going to be really interesting to watch. A really important player. Another player that the on-off stats really like, particularly offensively. And that one I do buy because I think he's got more of a well-rounded game offensively than Asante does, and he generally plays point guard when Asante's not in there. So you can see, like, okay, like you kind of buy that, and that kind of matches the eye test. He's a very interesting player. It'll be interesting to see where exactly he ranks in the pecking order going forward for Iowa offensively. Maybe not this year, but like a year or two from now. And one kind of like, this is kind of something I'm hoping to see improve, not just for Pat in general, but sometimes some of Iowa's better players, you can tell they're wired to score more than pass at times. And there's just certain times, and particularly I noticed in the Oklahoma game where it felt like, yeah, good. Or can you drive to pass it, or drive to score, but if it's not there, kick it out. And sometimes Iowa's better players get a little bit too focused on driving to score and not necessarily driving to pass. And I think that got a lot better in the Seton Hall game. I think I would, just based on this game though, Pat McCaffrey needs to do a better job of finding his teammates when he's driving. I think Tony and Peyton, the other two of Iowa's better perimeter scorers, they're wired to score, but they still find their teammates consistently enough. But Pat really does need to do a much better job, though, of finding his teammates when he's looking to drive the ball. Again, there were many times in this North Florida game where he just drove straight into traffic and he got shot altered just because he's driving into too many buys. And you just kind of want to seem like, okay, find a teammate. Slow down a little bit, find a teammate. And if you want to finish around the rim, you want to attack, that's fine, but you have to recognize when it's just not there and you have to find the open man. And I think that was a little bit of a struggle. A solid game overall, but that needs to improve. It really does need to improve. Yeah. I don't know. And another thing I guess I want to know is like, I was still kind of leaning into that mid-range tendency for their team in general. We still rank very highly in the percentage of our shots that are taken from the mid-range, which, again, like I struggle with it to a certain extent because I think when you're playing a team like North Florida who doesn't have the kind of shot blocking that necessarily test you, you shouldn't be trying to play like that. And we'll get into something a little bit later, but like again, like when you play a team like this, I would prefer like if you don't take so many mid-range shots. However, that being said, like there's several viable players who have shown a really keen ability to hit it. Pat McCaffrey can hit it. Tony Perkins can hit it. Peyton Sanford can hit it. Josh Dix can hit it. You see, obviously, Ben Krikke is the master of it. Owen Freeman can hit those shots. Josh Dix can hit those shots. Bryce Sanford had a pump fake in this game and showed the ability to hit that mid-range. And Lodge did a good job of using pump fakes and putting the ball on the floor and getting to his mid-range in this game too, but he didn't hit that shot. It'll be interesting to see if he's able to consistently hit that shot going forward, because I really do love Lodge's shooting potential because I love his stroke. There's no waste in motion. It's a really smooth one. So I think he's a shooter, but is he the kind of guy who can do a 1-2 dribble pull-up and score? I think that's still something to be determined with Lodge, but a catch-and-shoot guy he for sure definitely is capable of. But we have a lot of guys who are capable of putting the ball 1-2 dribble on the floor and scoring, which is nice to see. But sometimes I feel like Iowa's still a little too reliant on it. But I think against certain opponents it might be a good thing. I think we could probably just get into awards now. I've been going on for 50-plus minutes. I don't need this to go on much longer. I think you have to give the defensive player of the game to Owen. Now, that being said, Tony Perkins came out really... He was a man on a mission, and I think you have to respect that because he really is separating himself as Iowa's best perimeter defender. But at the same time, it's like the way that Owen was able to impact the game defensively, able to alter shots even if he's not blocking shots, and he still blocks plenty of shots too. You don't have to worry about that. But also, he shows the ability. He's really quick on the perimeter. He's capable of getting steals. There's 2 different times he got deflections, denying a post feed because he's agile, quick enough to get around the guy and still get his hand on the ball. Like, Iowa's most naturally gifted defender to this point, and he's really standing out, both just from the eye test perspective and from the analytic perspective, as Iowa's most important defender. And I think eventually we're going to get to the point where he starts, I think, but I don't know when that's going to be. But that being said, he's still incredibly important. I think everyone can see that. I don't think you need me to tell you that. That's very evident. The overall game ball, we'll give to Tony Perkins. Really got us off. He kept us in a good spot early in the game when North Florida was still more or less in the game. Iowa's best player early, attacking the rim, getting to his floor game, getting to his mid-range game, playing really good defense, finding his teammates, playing with real purpose, intensity, and passion. And again, he carried Iowa for many parts of the game where Iowa wasn't necessarily playing the best. And that matters. That clutch gene matters. That ability to step up when you need to step up, that matters. It's a performance he can definitely be proud of. So, getting to previewing the next game now. And I've been wrong on a couple of these. I was particularly wrong in the Oklahoma preview because they were just blatantly better than I gave them credit for. But it's kind of nice to be able to preview a team that like I've actually seen, like you actually consistently watch play basketball. We'll be talking the Purdue Boilermakers. Going to Mackey Arena, that's tough. Obviously, number 1 in the nation. A great environment. So it's a difficult game for many reasons, and I don't think it's a game that Iowa should obviously expect to win. But I think the kind of weird thing that makes it even more difficult is just like the approach that I think Purdue's probably going to take this game. So if you've been following just the discourse around Purdue basketball, like you know the kind of drill, it's like, oh God, like they always do super well in the regular season, and then people criticize them because they don't do well in the NCAA tournament because they don't handle pressure or whatever, or they don't handle different styles very well. And I think the thing that makes me really nervous about this kind of game is Purdue is very aware of that criticism. They've had to hear about it all offseason because of how the Fairleigh Dickinson game went last year. So there's going to be a lot of motivation. And Iowa isn't necessarily an important game for Purdue just because we're not like super big rivals. I mean, I know there was that one thing in the football a couple years ago where we were, I guess, crossover rivals for some reason. Jim Delaney decided we were the most hated rivals, I guess, for whatever. But well, I'm sure they don't obviously like us, but it's not like they have bigger fish to fry. They have bigger rivals than Iowa. They're not like, oh my God, they're not thinking constantly daily about how they can beat Iowa. But that being said, even though we're not biggest rivals, I think this is a really important game that I think Purdue is really going to be motivated in. And why is that? Because Iowa is going to be looking to press. And Purdue, I think, is going to be looking to make a statement when they play teams like Iowa who press. I think Purdue is going to be really motivated to show the world that, hey, just because a team presses doesn't mean we can't handle it. They're going to be out to prove something against Iowa's press. They're going to be out to prove that shit isn't going to bother them anymore. I think you're probably going to get a motivated Purdue. It's also the Big Ten home opener for Purdue. They had a big game against Xavier earlier in the year, but this is probably their biggest home game so far just because it's the Big Ten opener and Iowa's a solid opponent. So their crowd is going to bring it. I think their team is going to be motivated to prove that they can handle the press. So I think you're going to get a focused and energized number one Purdue team on the road. And that's incredibly scary. And that's the kind of things like sometimes you can maybe go and pull off an upset against a team like this, maybe if they're sleepwalking, but I do not believe you're going to get sleepwalking Purdue at all. And again, that's scary because that means if things don't go well, it can turn south extremely quickly. And we've seen that before in Mackey for Iowa. I don't think we've only won one time under Fran there. I think that was that one year where we had like a major comeback. But even then, in that game, we got down really big. So I think we're going to get motivated Purdue. Not because it's Iowa, because they're out to prove something against teams who press. But talking about Iowa's press, so this is kind of like something to like talk about. So like I think a common talking point you probably would have heard coming off of last year's Iowa Purdue game is, oh God, Iowa pressed a lot in the second half. And they didn't feel like they pressed that much in the first half. Oh, why didn't Iowa press more throughout the entire course of the game? And this is kind of like a good way of like identifying people who are more concerned with like what's happening, not why it's happening, who are able to kind of like pick apart why certain things happen in the game. So if you watched the Purdue game last year, Iowa actually did try and press after every single made shot, after every single dead ball against Purdue. And they did that the entire game. So you ask yourself, okay, so why didn't Iowa press so much in the first half? You say that, but why didn't Iowa press so much in the first half? Well, it's fairly simple. Oh shoot, that's the full score. So just, if you look at the first half box score for Iowa Purdue last year, Iowa, 21 points. Only 10 made buckets. No free throw attempts. So the reality is, you say to yourself, why didn't Iowa press that much against Purdue last year in the first half? It's because you need to make shots. You need to get to the free throw line to set up your press. And on top of that, this is kind of one of the situations where Iowa's tendency to not turn the ball over. Honestly, kind of hurt this way. Iowa only committed 4 turnovers. And you say to yourself, like, oh, that's a good thing. Well, it is a good thing. You don't want to turn the ball over, obviously. But one of the consequences of turnovers is like, let's say you, for some reason, just throw a pass into the second row of seats, whatever. That's a turnover, sure. But because it's a dead ball situation, it gives you a chance to set up your press. And because Iowa wasn't making shots, Iowa wasn't getting to the free throw line, Iowa wasn't turning the ball over, and pretty much means there's just no chance for Iowa at all to set up their press. Didn't make shots, didn't turn the ball over. There are only 6 combined fouls between both teams in that first half. So it was a free-flowing game that just wasn't weren't that many opportunities for pressing that first half. And the reality is, in the second half, Iowa just started making shots, and that meant we were able to set up our press. And again, another thing to keep in mind is when it comes to pressing and why don't you press after a missed shot necessarily? I just think you have to think about the alignment defensively. Iowa generally has their most athletic forward, whether it be at the 3 or 4 position, at the top of our press, and the 1 and 2 spots are at midcourt, and the 4 and 5, the other 2 defenders, the slowest defenders, are at the back. And the problem is, if you press off a missed shot, generally your center is going to be the closest one to the ball, closest one to rebound. So if you decide to press after a missed shot, that means, for example, Ben Cricky would be at the top of your press, your slowest defender. And since generally your guards are the ones who are asked to get back, or at least start the initial defensive transition, whether it be your point guard, shooting guard, or whatever, they're generally the ones who are asked to get back first defensively. So that means you have your slowest player at the top of the press, and you have your weakest shot blockers at the back of your press. Most teams are going to be able to beat that kind of press easily because they're just going to dribble around the center, and that'll give them numbers advantage. And because there's no shot blocking at the rim, they're just going to be able to attack willy-nilly and get layup after layup against the press, which is why you don't press after a missed shot. When you make a shot, it gives a chance for all the players to get to the ideal position to make the press actually work. So again, and so I think the thing about this kind of game is, and Iowa needs to press as much as possible to give themselves a chance to win this game, because Iowa is not good enough defensively at all to stop Purdue. We're not capable of stopping Purdue in the half court. And the thing is, even if Purdue misses a shot, because they have a 7'4" center in Zach Edey, he's going to gobble up a lot of offensive rebounds. So that means pretty much any possession that does not end up in a Purdue turnover is probably a good possession for Purdue, even if they don't make the initial shot, because they're just going to get the offensive rebound. So Iowa has to press to give themselves a chance to win this game. This entire game comes down to whether Iowa is going to be able to press enough to give themselves a chance to win. That's just a straight-up fact. Iowa's not going to be able to win if we don't press enough. And it's why we were a lot better in the second half of last year's Purdue game, because we were able to press more. And this is kind of a comment you probably get made fun of as an Iowa basketball fan. It sounds like a very Iowa basketball fan kind of take. But and because of the way this all goes, this game's really not about defense. This game's all about offense. Because in order to set up our press, our offense has to produce, make shots. So the reality of the situation is the only way Iowa's going to be able to get stops is if we make enough buckets to set up press. So our offense has to be on point. Our offense is probably the most important part of this game, which again sounds like a very Iowa basketball fan thing to say, but I think it's just the reality of the situation. Iowa isn't good enough defensively if we're not making shots. So I think you really have to think about like the right personnel, and I talked a little bit earlier about contrasting Josh and DeSante. It's kind of interesting because I think DeSante's length and athleticism can be very valuable in this kind of game pressing-wise. But at the same time, like, I just think you can make the argument it's much more important that, like, Iowa gets their best offensive players on the floor just so we can score more. And on top of that, when you think about it, while DeSante's shooting 70+% around the rim on the year, you're going up against a 7'4" center. I mean, how realistic is it to expect to get a lot of buckets around the rim? Probably not realistic. So like, I just don't know if this is the game really for DeSante. And there are going to be games where DeSante is going to be able to make an impact offensively. I just don't really know if this is one of those games. But at the same time, you want his defense kind of in this game. So that's going to be an interesting little thing to look at. And again, Iowa's mid-range tendency against most teams, I don't know if it's a good tendency I like. But when you're going up against a 7'4" center who's going to be able to block every single shot around the rim, and Purdue's going to play drop coverage and ask him to guard the paint or anything, when you're playing that kind of team, the ability to hit mid-range shots can be extremely valuable. And you saw in the Creighton game against Colkbrand, who's 7'1". Sometimes the best shot is a mid-range shot against those kind of players. So, and a guy like Josh Dix, who's capable of hitting that mid-range shot, I think it's probably a better fit for this specific game versus Purdue than DeSante is. And again, Iowa's going to have to be on from mid-range like they were against Creighton. And if we're able to be as good as we were from mid-range, or just shooting on our jumpers in general, whether it be 2 or 3, that gives Iowa the best chance defensively to get stops. So to me, it really just all comes down to Iowa needs to put themselves in the best position offensively, just so we can score as much as we can, so we can set up our press as much as we can. And sometimes our press is going to get beaten. It's not the greatest press known to mankind, but it's legitimately Iowa's only chance. There will be times that Purdue probably beats it for layups or open threes, etc. Probably several times, but it's Iowa's only chance. And to give ourselves a chance, we have to score buckets. So I think it's a tough game. I think Iowa probably has a better chance than most people would give them credit for in this kind of game, but make no mistake about it, it's the number 1 team in the country on the road in a tough environment. It's going to be a tough game. I think Iowa, again, can put up a fight, but it's still going to be tough, and I think you have to respect Purdue for what they've done this year so far. But yeah, I think this video's gone on long enough. I shouldn't keep rambling on. I'll see you next time. Catch you later.